Our heart journey ends with the cardiac conduction system and the cardiac cycle. And take a look first at this amazing video.
Now, if this isn't the craziest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, apparently a turtle's heart still beats after you cut it out of its body. I was cleaning this turtle. I cut its head off like a half hour ago, but I got down to his heart, and I saw it was still beating inside there. So I cut it out, and that was about 3 or 4 minutes ago. And this dang thing is still beating. Well, that's proof that turtles are very crazy.
Yeah. So that's not proof that turtles are very crazy. That's proof that the heart has an intrinsic conduction system, which we'll talk about in a moment. But what I want you to know and see in this next video is that human hearts can do the same thing that that turtle heart did.
This is seriously just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, you guys. There's a heart beating right in front of me.
It continues to receive warm blood, as well as a proprietary formula of nutrients.
Conceivably, how long could you keep a heart beating on this?
If you can renew the
Renew
pool,
blood?
it can go as long as you would like.
Tamara Hayal, the VP of Clinical Development at Transmedics, showed me how the device allows clinicians to monitor the heart's rhythm and other vital signs every step of the way.
So this thing lets you know that everything is going okay.
Absolutely.
And what happens if something goes wrong?
You'll have detection here and alarms that are going on to tell you that you're out of range, and you can immediately control it. You can change pump flow. You can navigate into menus to change the settings to actually treat this heart. So you have a very comprehensive analysis of how this heart is behaving, and you have a chance to improve that behavior if needed and when needed.
So I have two questions for you. One, how fragile is the heart? And two, can I touch it?
One, it's not very fragile. Two, yes, you can touch it, but it's not the norm during clinical practice.
Okay, not the norm? You're gonna make an
by all
exception?
means, you can touch it. This is a training heart today, so by all means, if you want to feel the ventricle pulsating, right side and left side, and you can feel the vessel itself, see the pressure in the vessel.
Oh, it's warm.
It's warm, it's beating, it's functioning. It's just functioning as if it's in your body.
Gosh.
And it's not just hearts which can be transported on this system. There's a similar study currently underway with lungs, which has yielded some promising early results.
You see it opening and going up and down?
So far, it's cut the complication rate by more than 60% and improved the survival rate by 30%. This is the Transmedics clean room, where the organ care system gets assembled. So far, hundreds have been manufactured and sent to 8 different countries around the world. And hopefully next year, with FDA approval, it'll become available in the US, where there are more heart transplants than anywhere else in the world.
Now, inside the cardiac conduction system are these specialized cardiac muscle cells in the myocardium that initiate and coordinate contraction of the heart. And there are two terms that we'll use to describe these special features of the heart. One is intrinsic. So intrinsic means the contraction of the heart, it doesn't require the nervous system to tell it to contract. On its own, just like that turtle heart and just like that human heart, it will contract on its own. It has the intrinsic ability to contract and repeatedly contract. The other ability it has is to set its own rhythm. It's autorhythmic. The heart is autorhythmic. It's self-pacing. It has what are called these pacemaker nodes, these portions of specialized cardiac muscle cells that can set the pace of the heart. Again, without any nervous system stimulation. So intrinsically, it can beat on its own. Autorhythmically, it can set its own regular heartbeat. Now, the nervous system can and does all the time really modify the intrinsic rate of the pacemaker cells, because we'll see on their own, the heart is going to set a level of heartbeat that's too fast. So the nervous system is kind of constantly slowing it down a little. So structures of the cardiac conduction system, we start with the sinoatrial node, number 1 here, found in the upper right atrium, and it would set the heart rate at about 80 to 100 beats per minute, too fast. So the autonomic nervous system will slow that down to a more reasonable, perhaps 70 beats per minute. The SA node, when it fires, it will create this action potential, which will spread across the atria, right? So down all through the right atrium, and then it will cross over into the left atrium, more or less simultaneously. The left atrium will receive that signal and start to contract. Here's the thing, though. We want the atria and the ventricles to contract. Atria and ventricles. Atria and ventricles. There needs to be a pause in between when the atria contract and the ventricles contract, because these action potentials are fast, you know? They will, if allowed, run through the whole heart and cause all the contraction to happen all at once, and the heart will, I don't know if it will explode, but it's not going to move blood. So the question is, if the signal spreads across the atria and then it tries to travel down into the ventricles, what do we call the dense, regular connective tissue that makes these bundles that separate the electrical ability of the atria and the ventricles? What is the impermeable barrier found between the atria and the ventricles? And if you think way back to an earlier, maybe the first discussion of the heart, that is the cardiac skeleton. So if that signal is blocked here and blocked here, and it can't travel down into the ventricles, it ends up in only one place, right here, number 2, the AV node. This is found at the base of the right atrium, and due to the microscopic structure of the AV node, it delays that impulse. It allows the atria to finish their contraction before it sends the signal down to the ventricles. So, very important. If the SA node is damaged, the AV node can also function as a backup pacemaker. It's a little bit on the slow side, but it is there as an option. Okay, the AV node will delay that signal, and then the signal will travel down into number 3, which is the AV bundle, also called the bundle of His. All that is really doing is just carrying the signal down to the bundle branches. There's a right bundle branch, a left bundle branch. Those are carrying the signal down through the interventricular septum to the apex of the heart, down here. And those will then reach the Purkinje fibers, which bring those signals up the ventricle. And this is important. We want the ventricles to start contracting at the bottom and then push the blood upwards. We can't have the opposite. We don't want it to contract like this. We want to kind of milk that blood up from the apex of the heart. So this system allows the more inferior muscle cells to contract and then, you know, cause the contraction of the more and more superior portions of the ventricles. Purkinje fibers too can also be backup pacemakers. So they have the intrinsic ability to fire action potentials and set a rhythm, but it's very, very slow rhythm. And I went ahead and included Purkinje here. I don't usually give the shout outs to the, you know, rich, well-off white men who are the only ones allowed to do science back in the day. But Purkinje is quite dapper and discovered that we had unique fingerprints, and immediately was like, we can catch criminals now. Like, immediately put that together. He seems like pretty good brain on that guy. So that's the cardiac conduction system. Obviously, lots can go wrong there. And so you've all heard about pacemakers, artificial pacemakers that can be surgically implanted to treat arrhythmias, you know, some interruption in the normal cardiac function. This was like top of the line pacemaker until recently. Now we're sticking these inside people. These are called Micras. Basically, they'll cut off blood to your femoral, I think they do in your femoral vein, and they'll feed this little cylinder up into your heart, into the right ventricle, and then they'll deploy these tines and it'll grab on to the ventricular wall of your heart, and that will deliver the signal to the heart wall. And if you need to like change the settings or something, Bluetooth, baby, no problemo. Pretty cool stuff. You may also have heard of in your life ectopic pacemakers. That's when like some other part of your heart can start to set your heartbeat, and that can be due to like things like even caffeine. You can cause a certain part of your heart to start like sending out these electrical signals, and that's no bueno. So that's totally different from an artificial pacemaker. This is in your body, but this is not the part of the body you want to set the pace of your heart. SA node, that's what should be setting your heart rate. And despite what TV dramas tell us, as much as I love House, defibrillators do not treat flatline patients. So you'll get into this into physiology, but if you're curious and you want to go down an internet rabbit hole for a while, try to figure out why is it that if someone goes that you wouldn't be grabbing these paddles. Pretty interesting stuff. Okay, we finished with the cardiac cycle. This is just the period of time between the start of one heartbeat and the beginning of the next. So it's, one cycle. We've already kind of been talking about the cardiac cycle, like all through this heart discussion, but now we're just naming it, and we're going to acknowledge that there are alternate periods of contraction and relaxation during which blood is moving based on the pressure inside those different parts of the anatomy. When a portion of the heart, when a chamber of the heart is ejecting blood, so it's contracting, ejecting blood into the other chamber or into a vessel, we call that systole. And when that chamber relaxes, we call it diastole. So systole and diastole, systole and diastole. If you look at this cardiac conduction image, let's say we start right here. At the start of this cardiac cycle, we are in atrial diastole. So the atria are relaxed. And we're in ventricular diastole. And the ventricles are relaxed. So everybody's relaxed. So what's happening at this time? Well, blood is dropping back down. Oops, yellow arrows first. Blood is dropping back down from the recent contractions of the ventricles. So remember, blood is shooting up and then time out. Let's start a new cardiac cycle. So the blood starts to come back down. It slams into the semilunar valves. Boom. And at the same time as that's happening, blood is slowly trickling back in to the atria. So that's an early stage of this diastole. And then blood keeps glurk, filling up the atria to the point where the AV valves open up and the blood starts to go into the ventricles. Glurk. This is like pressure changes, gravity causes this. There's no contraction of the heart right now. But not all the blood will just automatically kind of drop into the ventricles. You do want the atria to contract, to push a little bit of blood back into the ventricles. When something contracts, we say systole. Systole is when something's contracting. So in this image, the atria are contracting. They're going to push any blood that's left down into the ventricles. The last thing is just for the ventricles to contract. So in ventricular systole, the ventricles are contracting. As they first start to contract a little bit, that blood is like, the easy way out. Why don't we just go back where we came? The blood is just going to try to go back up into the atria. But, you didn't say the magic word. It's going to hit those valves and force them closed. Then the ventricle is going to continue contracting. Remember, this is when the papillary muscles are going to contract and they're going to hold tight to the chordae tendineae and they'll hold tight to the AV valves. And yeah, the AV valves are almost going to blow open, valvular prolapse, but they don't. They hold tight and it forces the blood up and out the ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk. And that is ventricular systole. Now we've made it back to the start, so we've completed one cardiac cycle. And on it goes for like, who knows how many years. A long time. All right, so that's the heart. Hope you enjoyed.